Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Shilpa from Insight. We are excited to welcome you to the first session of our webinar series, focusing on understanding the support systems that are available for the neurodivergent children. Today's topic is from support to independence: the evolving role of a shadow teacher. We are honored to have Dr. Bindya Shajit with us. She's a teach certified expert with over 15 years of experience in neurodiversity and school psychology. She heads the programs. She's the head of programs at Insight and holds a PhD in School of Psychology from NCSU USA. This session will explore how shadow teachers can support the journey from guided support to greater independence. Over to you, ma'am. You can take it forward.
Thank you, Shilpa. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. I know it's a it's a holiday for many of you. I hope I'm audible. Shilpa, can you hear me? Okay. Shilpa, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible to
Is
me.
it
Your audio is a little bit low for me. You guys can
okay?
confirm your audibility. Yes, I think the participants can hear you very
All right.
well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Happy Vishu, happy Putanda, and most importantly, sending you wishes for a fabulous Ambedkar Jayanti. I think this is a perfect day to start the series on inclusion on the birthday of Dr. Ambedkar. Once again, welcome to the webinar. And today we will be talking about the role of shadow teachers in guiding children from support to independence. So, in the 1 hour that we're together, I would like to first talk about how do you choose the right school for a child who's
Uh,
neurodivergent?
Ma'am, just one second. I think the audio is still a little bit low.
A little bit, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What do we do now? Hold on, let me.
Hold on, guys. Just
Is this any better now, Shilpa? Or is it the same?
yeah, the audio is better at my side. Audience, is it okay for you? You guys can just send a thumbs up on the chat. I think it's audible for me, so you can
All right,
definitely go.
thank you, thank you. All right, so in the 1 hour that we're together, I would like to explore how do we choose the right school for a child who's neurodivergent. Once we've chosen the school, what is the role of a shadow with the child in that school? And also, we will be exploring how do we foster independence through neuroaffirmative practices. At Insight, we have been working with a number of different schools over the past many years, and our experience with different schools have been varied. We've had really good experiences with some school and not so good experiences with others. And it's a we I think we try to navigate the relationship with different schools, given the needs of the child, given the needs of the family. So it is a it is never a one size fits all kind of a solution. We have worked out a lot of different solutions to different schools that we've worked with. Now, when we encourage families to find a school for their child, we look at how big is the school, because sometimes we find smaller schools, newer schools that are like you have these startup schools with smaller class sizes. Maybe they are in a small housed in a small house. So schools that are smaller and with lower strength of students sometimes seem to work better for our children because they get the kind of attention that they require in the school. The school's attitude and approach to inclusion is also very important because we have a lot of schools now claiming to be inclusive, but their inclusion policies basically end at the admission process. But most schools don't realize that once you have admitted a child is when the actual journey starts. How you need to support a child will depend on that particular child's needs. But this is not something that we see when even when we have included a child in a regular school. We find that despite the school being aware that the child is neurodivergent, there is this push for the child to conform with some of the expectations of the school, of the classroom, or of the grade level academic and behavioral expectations. Now, this becomes difficult for the child because for valid reasons. We also look at what are the services that are offered in school. Most schools don't even have a special education department, and which is by I think most boards mandate that a school should have at least one special education teacher and a counselor on board to support children who have diverse needs. But there are many schools who don't have a special education department or a special education teacher on board. This is also something we encourage families to look for when they are looking for schools. We also encourage them to talk to people who are already accessing that school to find out what are the different kind of learning needs that is being addressed in that school currently. And also, how do they do the intake assessment? We know that a lot of our children who are neurodivergent may not be good at paper pencil tests, or they may not be good at any test in a new, strange environment. Even if they are really good at answering questions and doing well in tests in a familiar environment. So when a student is going to a school for the first time, and the school insists that the child take the intake assessment like everybody else, then we know that school's inclusion policy is probably not in the right place. Because if you really understand the needs of a child who's neurodivergent, we will make room um, for the appropriate kind of assessment to understand what are the learning needs of this child. So these are some things that we tell families to keep in mind when we are choosing a school. Now, once you have chosen a school, we also tell families that, like we do with neurotypical children, when we find a school, we think it is a good school for our child. We admit the child in school in kindergarten, and the child continues in that school till grade 12. This may or may not happen for our children. I usually tell families that let's go from year to year. Each year may be a different experience for your child. And this will depend on a lot of different factors, including the teacher who's teaching your child's class. So I also encourage families to continue to evaluate the appropriateness of the school for your child. And if you feel like it is not working out, then let's go ahead and find a different school. So, teacher attitudes are important. How do teachers approach a child who is neurodivergent in the classroom? How do they include the child in some of the activities in the classroom? All this is very important when we are um, when we are determining if the school is appropriate for our child after the child has started going there. What are the expectations that are placed on the child? As I told you earlier, is the school and the teacher expecting the child who is in first grade to do all the lessons as it is being done in grade one, to pass all the exams that is being given in grade one, to write all the homework that is being assigned in grade one? Are they holding this child to the same expectations of the rest of the class? Then we are probably not including the child appropriately. Um, as I told you earlier, nature of SEND support. So many schools that have a SEND department and have a special education teacher on board sometimes does not provide the necessary support to the child. Even when a child is going with a shadow that is appointed by the family, The SEND department has certain responsibilities that they need to fulfill towards the child. We need to look at what is the kind of support that the child is receiving from the SEND department at that point. What are the accommodations available to the child? As I told you earlier, are the expectations on the child the same as the rest of them, or is the child given some exemptions? Say, for example, if the child needs a lot of movement breaks, is the child given that? Or is the child expected to sit in the classroom for the entire period without moving from the seat? If the child needs some kind of modifications in the exam paper, is that being given to the child? So these kinds of accommodations and modifications, are they being availed to the child at the school? We also look at how is the continued support for the child. We see that a lot of schools um, are able to support neurodivergent children in younger classes, in lower grades, but once they reach higher grades, then the um, support um, tends to become a little questionable, because as children grow older and go into higher grades, then the emphasis becomes about um, clearing exams, or the kind of marks you're making on these exams. So at that point, the schools are also not very comfortable including children. So this is also something that we encourage families to look into when they're evaluating their current school placement of their child. Now, what is a shadow's role in all this? When we have found an appropriate school and we have taken admission, when a shadow goes in to support the child, shadow's role is to make sure that the child receives the necessary support to thrive in the school. What happens is, what we see that is predominantly happening is that a shadow teacher who's appointed in the school is there to make the child meet the grade level expectations of the classroom, which invariably turns into a deficit based approach. So when I say a deficit based approach, say the child is in grade 1, the child is still not reading. So then the shadow's job is to make the child read. Or the child is not copying the notes from the board, then the shadow's job is to make the child write the notes from the board. The child is not sitting in the classroom throughout the period. The shadow's job is to make the child sit in the classroom. So this is what we are seeing predominantly shadows being used for, and this is not working in favor of the children who are availing the services of the shadow. What we need is, what we want to do is, we want to have the child be as independent as possible. When I say as independent as possible, each child's level of independence, readiness for independence would differ. So a shadow's job is to determine how independent can this child function, in what areas of functioning can this child be more independent, in what areas the child continues to need the shadow support. These are all um, these are all determinations that a shadow has to make to continue to support the child in the right way. So what we're seeing is, when there is a lot of emphasis on deficit based approach, or where there is a lot of emphasis on deficits itself, it is very difficult to make a child independent. The reason why the child is not performing certain skills in the classroom is because the child is not ready to do it. And then when we keep pushing the child to do a skill that the child is not ready to do, the child cannot independently do it. The child will continue to need the support of someone. On the other hand, when we follow a neuroaffirmative approach, which is what I'll be talking about in the rest of my talk today, we are accepting the child's strengths, we are accepting the child's areas of needs, and we are supporting the child accordingly. When we do that, it is easier for the child to be independent in certain areas. Now, that may or may not be the areas that we are looking for independence in. And that is where the our model of inclusion and our model of using shadows is failing currently. So we will talk about it a little bit more, or towards the end of the talk, you'll understand what I'm trying to say here. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the concept of neurodiversity. The easiest way to explain neurodiversity is by giving an analogy of a garden. A garden has a lot of different types of plants. You have trees, you have shrubs, you have creepers, you have succulents that don't need a lot of water, you have tropical plants that need a lot of water, you have flowering plants, you have plants that bear fruit. So you have a lot of different types of plants in your garden. Now, if the gardener were to say that, I will give you all the same amount of water, would that work out for all the plants? Because we know then the succulents would definitely die because they don't need as much water as a tropical plant needs. Or if the gardener decides that I'm only going to give enough water as the succulents need to all plants, then the other plants won't be able to thrive because they need more water than the succulents. At no point does a gardener tell a creeper plant to stop being unruly and going all over the place. Why can't you just, why can't you just stay in one place like the tree is standing? So these are not questions that we ask a plant or ask, the plants that we are caring for. What we do is we give the right amount of care or the appropriate kind of care that each plant needs in the garden. But this is not how we approach our children. Our children are brought to the same environment, kept in the same environment, and we tell them that I will give you the same amount of water, which is the same curriculum. And you all have to figure out a way to thrive in this. I don't care how much you can take it or how much you can't take it. So the whole concept of neurodiversity is very similar to this garden that I spoke about. We have children and adults who are wired in their brains very differently. Now, because of the brain wiring, the way they interact with the world is very different, right? The way they behave, the way they respond, the way they react, the way they socialize, the way they think, the way they learn, all this is different from one person to the other, right? So, when we talk about neurodiversity, we are all part of it because we all have different wirings of brain. We all respond to our environments very differently from each other. Um, what happens is in most of these situations, as I told you earlier, in the garden, if I say I'm going to give you all the same amount of water, what we are trying to say is there's only one way, one right way of doing things. So currently in our schools, what they're saying is there's only one way of learning, which is by sitting in the class for however long a period is 45 minutes, 50 minutes, looking at the teacher, nodding your head while the teacher is talking, copying down whatever the teacher is writing on the board. Now, this is the one right way of doing learning in our schools. If some children are not able to do that, then they are immediately marginalized from the classroom. So, what happens when there is only one right way of doing things? Inclusion cannot happen. On the other hand, if we are willing to make those exemptions for each child and the way the child learns, the way the child expresses their learning, we are we are stating that there are many different right ways of doing things, which makes it easier for us to include so many more people and children in the classroom. Now, neurodiversity also talks about um, how we know that just because a creeper does not stand in one place like a tree, the creeper has its own role to play in the garden, right? The creeper may not be playing the role of a tree, but that doesn't mean that the creeper is any less than the tree. So the differences that we see currently are only being viewed as deficits because we come from a very medical model of approaching neurodivergence or children with special needs. We are always trying to fix what we think the child is not doing well, or fix what we think the child is where the child is deviating from the norm. So if the child is not looking into your eyes, we do everything possible to make the child look into our eyes. If the child is not speaking to communicate, we do everything possible to make the child speak to communicate. So when we keep on focusing on these areas that the child is not doing well in, it becomes a deficit-based model. And we're also emphasizing those deficits and telling the child that, see, these are things that you can't do. So what neurodiversity movement suggests is that instead of looking at these as deficits, let's just accept them as differences and move. So we know that in our classroom, there may be children who cannot be seated. There may be children who may not look into my eyes when I'm talking. There may be children who will not be able to write down the notes from the board. And I'm okay with it. And let me figure out how you can learn and how you can express whatever you have learned in class. So the neurodiversity movement is more about accepting a person um, and nurturing their strengths rather than focusing on their deficits. So this is an approach that we take at Insight. We train our teachers also to follow this approach at Insight. So this is a philosophy that we follow. And we make sure that anything that we do with our children must be neuroaffirming. So now let's also visit some of the lingo that is associated with the concept of neurodiversity. So as I said, neurodiversity means that we all have different brains and we are all part of the spectrum. When there are children who are having significant difficulties meeting the normative expectations, we call those children or adults neurodivergent. That is, they are diverging from the norms. And people who are able to conform to those expectations, um, we call them neurotypical because they conform to the standards that are set by the society. So a lot of us identify ourselves as neurotypical, and the individuals who are not able to meet the popular societal expectations or the norms, we consider them as neurodivergent. Now, I have a way of looking at this. What I say is the only difference between neurotypical people and neurodivergent people is their ability to pretend. If you think about it, I can sit in a class, I can look at the teacher, be seated for hours at a time, look at the teacher, nod my head, write down all the notes, and not be present in the class mentally. I can be thinking about something else, but nobody will know because I know how to pretend to be that student that I'm expected to be. On the other hand, some of the neurodivergent kids we work with, the moment they have started thinking about something else, we all know that they have started thinking about something else. So the difference is that they don't know how to pretend, and we do. So, what is neuroaffirmative practices? Now, if you look at the the terms on this screen, these are all these are all uh, these are all um, indicators for us, that we look to identify if a child may qualify for a diagnosis of autism. So when we have a very, very young child, like a 2 or 3 year old, come to us, we usually have them interact with their parents in front of us, and we watch the child to see if the child is exhibiting all these behaviors or not. Now, when we see that the child is probably not doing well in some of these indicators, then we say either the child is at risk for autism or maybe diagnosed with the condition. Now, once a child gets diagnosed, any professional who engages in therapeutic interventions for the child, their first um, approach to intervention is that you try and fix these things, right? So, say for example, you have identified that this child does not have eye contact. So, my goal is first to develop eye contact. The child is not responding to name call. So let's teach him to respond to name call. Let's make him respond to name call. The child is going and sitting alone somewhere, so let's teach him some social skills. Let's give him some social skills training to make him engage with others, and everything, so on and so forth. The child is not communicating. Oh, the child is not. So let's give him speech therapy to make him speak, to communicate. So this is the approach that we usually take, and this is what I mentioned earlier is consistent with the deficit based approach. On the other hand, what we're trying to say here is, when we talk about neuroaffirmative approaches, is that I, as an interventionist or as a teacher, should be able to teach this child, even if the child is not looking into my eyes, even if the child is not communicating with me in the traditional way of communication, even if the child is not engaging with me. I need to figure out ways to engage this child and help this child learn the concepts that I want to teach the child. Now, there are ways to do this. It is our conventional belief or our conventional teaching wisdom that a child needs to look into our eyes to learn, or the child needs to look into the book that we are showing to learn, or the child needs to talk to communicate. These are all our conventional wisdom. But this is not the case anymore. So, when we are talking about neuroaffirmative practices, we are talking about accepting these differences and still being able to teach the child the skills that we want them to learn. So, when I talk about neuroaffirmative practices, so we call it neurodiversity affirming practices, neuroaffirming practices, or neuroaffirmative practices. These are all words that are used interchangeably. When I talk about neuroaffirmative practices, I like to use this visual. This is a infographic borrowed from Instagram. This was made by a person who is autistic themselves. Um, when we when we when we listen to people who have experienced the condition and is living with it, I think we tend to get a lot more valuable information from them than we may get from research or studies that are conducted by neurotypical people, for example. So I like this visual. I like how they have arranged the different the core principles that they think are part of neuroformative practices. So I usually use this for my classes to help my teachers understand neuroaffirming practices. But today I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to pick out a few important ones from these. I may even club a couple of them together, and I'll be talking about those. So I'm going to be talking about four core principles from this visual that we just saw. The first one is honoring all forms of communication. Now, as we know, it is so important in our culture that a child speak. Most of the families who come to us at an early stage, they come to us because the child is not talking. There may be a lot of other symptoms that the child is showing, but that may not have been, you know, that may not have been, the parents may have not noted those symptoms. But what they note or what stands out is that the child is not talking. When I go to these small towns or villages, for to meet clients or families, um, I, there'll be this two or three generations in the house living together, and the parents also don't understand what is going on with the child, and the grandmother will tell me, he's really good in everything. It's just that he doesn't talk. So I'm sure there are a lot of other things that the child is struggling with, but the grandmother is not even noticing it. Only that not speaking part is what stands out. And this speaking to communicate is so important in our culture that most families also insist that the child speaks to communicate, because if the child does not speak to communicate is when they stand out in the community, because everybody asks, why is the child not talking? But if the child can talk, then the child can get away with a lot of other difficulties that the child has. So there is a lot of emphasis on speaking to communicate. But when we look at it from a neuroaffirmative perspective, it is important to understand that not all individuals can use speech to communicate. That means we have to make arrangements to um, to support that person's communication in whatever way that is appropriate for that person. So there may be people who use sign language to communicate. There may be people who use an AAC device, an augmentative and alternative communication device like Avaz, etc., to communicate. That is where you have an app installed on your tablet or on your phone and you use pictures or typing in that app to communicate with your communication partner. There may be children who prefer to write to communicate. There are some children who type to communicate. Um, there are children who use objects to communicate. There are children who use pictures to communicate. So these are all different forms of communication. And we need to be open to these different forms of communication. So when our shadow teachers are working with children, we usually, when the shadow teacher tells us that either the child is not speaking to communicate, or if the child uses minimal language, or if the child is what we refer to as an unreliable speaker. An unreliable speaker is a child who speaks at times but not all the time. So there are times when the child might choose to speak and say a word or two, but that is not consistent. We don't get it all the time. So even for children who are unreliable speakers, we suggest that we need to explore an alternative form of communication. You can continue to develop speech, you can continue to attend speech therapy or work on speech whenever it comes, let it come. But parallelly, we need to work on a mode of communication that is appropriate for the child. What happens when we don't do this? We've seen that a lot of families who insist on speech, and there's a lot of myths around using alternative forms of communication also, because there's this belief that if they start using an alternative form of communication, they may not use speech later. That's a myth. And we've seen that when a child starts off with alternative form of communication, eventually when the speech comes, the child has already built up on a lot of vocabulary that can be used in speech. So there's a lot of myth surrounding use of alternative forms of communication, which makes families reluctant to use or try out alternative forms of communication. So we have a lot of shadow teachers whose families insist that the child speak, and they are not open to exploring communication options that I just mentioned. So what we encourage is that our shadow teachers must explore a different option for communication, and should also psychoeducate families to make them understand that this is important for the child. We see that a lot of children who do not develop communication at least by the age of 12 or 13 tend to have a hard time during their teenage years. Puberty is hard for any child, neurotypical or not. When you are neurodivergent and when you cannot communicate, all these changes that your body is going through at that time, it becomes all the more difficult for you when you don't have a means of communication. So we encourage families to make sure that the child has an appropriate form of communication, at least before the child hits puberty. The second core principle that I'm going to talk about is adapting systems and environments, or reframing expectations. Now, this is what a lot of this constitutes a lot of what our shadow teachers do with children when they are in school. Our shadow teachers, we keep telling them that you're not there just to sit with the child and do what the school is asking or the parent is asking you to do with the child. We are there to advocate for the child. We are there to make sure that we bridge the gap between the child's level of performance and what the school is expecting of the child. So in that case, what we want is we focus on not changing the child, but changing the environment that the child is in. So this is something that we take pride in. We keep saying that when we focus on therapeutic approaches for the child, excuse me, what we are insisting is that there is something broken within the child that needs to be fixed. But what we are trying to, excuse me, but what we are trying to say is that the child's performance is being affected because of certain expectations that is there in the child's environment. So if we can change some of those expectations, reframe those expectations, or adapt some of those expectations for the child, it'll become easier for the child to perform in that environment. So this is where we say, if the child cannot sit for a long time, let's give them movement breaks. If the child cannot write, let's have another way of taking down notes. Can the child type? Or if the child is not into writing but the child can orally give you the answers for whatever they have learned, then let's not even worry about writing. Let's focus on the oral presentation of responses for exams. So these are all things that we look at. We uh, we try to incorporate into the child's learning environment at school. um, if the child is having difficulty understanding the expectations of the classroom, we encourage the shadow teachers to use visual schedules or other ways of communicating the expectations to the child. And as I said, if the child is not good at writing an exam, or if the child does really well in oral responses, we would encourage or we would urge the school to make that accommodation for the child so that the child can give his exams orally and somebody can scribe those answers for them. So these accommodations and modifications are available um, in most boards that we have in India today. But what happens is most schools are not willing to give these accommodations at a younger age. Or some families are also thinking that why do we want to let the child have an easy way out? Let's push them to do these things. But what happens is when you push a child to do things that the child is not ready to do, one, you're focusing on the deficits because the child is not ready to do them and you're reminding the child you're not good at these things. And two, you're also making the child averse to those things. So I know of families, who push their children to write at a very young age, and the child is not ready to write. The child's fingers are not ready to write. The child's brain is not ready to write. But we push and push and push the child to write, that the child starts hating writing. Even when the child gets to a point where the child is ready to write, the child has already developed an aversion towards writing. So um, uh, that is also a risk that we are taking when we push children to do skills that the child is not ready to do yet. So it is important to change the child's environment to help the child thrive. Third one I want to talk about is nurturing positive self identity. Again, when we use a deficit based approach, what happens is, as I mentioned earlier, we are reminding the child that you're not good at something. You're constantly reminding the child that you're not good at something. What are some of the interactions that we have with a child? If you think about it, within your family or when the child is at school within a classroom, you're either telling them how they're not good at something and how they're not doing it, right? You're not writing, or you're not speaking to communicate, or you're not looking in my eyes when you're talking. Look into the eyes, write your notes, copy from the board, listen to the teacher, sit in your place. So you're reminding the child what all the child cannot do, right? Whatever the child is not good at doing. Then the second thing that you do is, if the child is doing more of a behavior that you do not want, even then you are coming in and commenting on it. Stop stimming, or why can't you just sit in one place? Why are you always running around? So comments like this, they register in the child's brain. Um, we know a lot of children who are probably told that stimming is not a good thing, right? I usually tell families and teachers that stimming is like a sneeze. If it comes, you have to sneeze, right? So if the brain is asking the child to do something, and on the other hand, the environment is asking the child not to do it, imagine the pressure the child would have to control that brain's urge to do something. And when that urge comes out inadvertently, you're branding the child as somebody who is not a good boy. We are saying that you were not able to hold that urge, hence you're not a good boy. So we have a lot of children who may, like end up stimming, and then they'll come and keep telling our teachers that um, I'm a good boy. I'm not a bad boy. I'm not a bad boy. I'm a good boy. They keep on repeating this because they're feeling guilty that they did something that they're not allowed to do. So what happens when we're doing all these things is that we are not helping that child to build a positive self identity. The child is thinking, okay, I can't do this, this, and this. When I look around in my classroom, everybody else is doing, I'm not able to do it. So, which means, I'm not as good as the rest of them. And I'm also not able to follow some of the instructions that my family or my teachers are giving, like, not stimming or holding on to certain behaviors that my brain asks me to do. And hence, I'm not a good boy in that sense either. So, the emphasis is always on the deficits and what the child cannot do, which creates a negative positive self identity in the child. On the other hand, what we want to do is we want to flip this narrative and focus more on the child's strengths. Um, One of the things that I usually tell families is that, see, when you send a child to a school, you're sending the child there because the child has all the right to be in a regular school environment like everybody else's age. Now, I'm not sending the child to school so that the child will learn the sixth grade science or seventh grade maths and, come out with 90% um, or above grade in that subject. The reason why I'm sending them there is so that they are in a in an environment that is representative of their community. They are with children who are of their age. And they're also engaging with children of their age and they're doing things like children of their age. This is all that I'm looking for when I'm sending a child to school. When we have boards like open schooling, like National Institute of Open Schooling, which does not necessarily ask you what is your background before you come to write a 10th exam there, I don't think there is a need to emphasize the child going through all these exams and expectations, academic expectations in a school, when he can, very well just work on basic academic skills like reading and math and just be happy by doing things that he enjoys doing, he or she enjoys doing. So there are children who are interested in, specific topics. Like I have children who are really interested in history. But they want to explore things that they want to explore, not necessarily what is there in the history books in the school. But we stop them from doing that and we bring their attention back to the school curriculum and force them to study the school curriculum. But instead, if we can nurture those strengths that the children are naturally showing and give them opportunities to engage in those strengths more and more, I think that would be the best way to nurture that positive self identity. The last one I want to talk today is respecting autonomy and promoting self advocacy. Um, we need to understand that any child, they will do a skill if they can do it. There is no reason why a child will not do a skill when they can actually do it, right? So there are children who may play the fool every now and then, and just to you know piss you off or to play a prank with you that I don't want to write today, or I'm not in a mood to read today or whatever. But a child who does not have the skill to read or write will not pretend that they don't have it. They will definitely engage in reading or writing. So, what I'm trying to say is that if a child is finding it difficult to do something, that is because there is a genuine difficulty inside of them that is making it, that is stopping them from doing that skill. So, we need to be able to respect that. Most of the time, what we do is we label them, right? We say that, oh, he's just lazy, or he's choosing not to do it, or he's being very manipulative. These are some of the labels that we use on our children, but sometimes it is not because of any of that. It is because they genuinely cannot do that skill. So that is something we need to accept, and that is because the child is not ready to do that skill yet. We need to give him some more time, or give her some more time before they can start doing that skill. What we usually do is we resort to behavior modification techniques. Now, when we are trying to modify the behavior of a child, we are never really asking their permission to do that. We are doing it only because that is the norm, that is what everybody does, and hence we want them to do the same thing. So that is kind of a violation of the child's autonomy. So any behavior modification technique, for that matter, does not respect the child's autonomy. So we um, we explain this to our parents, we help them understand why behavior modification techniques are not good for our children. We know a lot of children who have grown up with behavior modification techniques or ABA or things like that, those kinds of interventional strategies, and now are adults and are coming back and telling us how much trauma that they've had going through an intervention like that. So if our goal is to help a child, that's what we should do, right? Now, if we cannot help a child, can we at least try not to hurt the child? So, behavior modification techniques is something that we do not approve of, we do not encourage, only because we know it is not neuroinformative. I think we should start giving our children more autonomy, more opportunities to make choices for themselves. Um, we also tend to be we also tend to be very protective of our children and not let them exercise their agencies, at least in areas where they can actually do it. um, we may not send our children alone to maybe to the closest grocery store to go pick up something and come back, or maybe send them downstairs in our apartment to play with other children for the fear that they may not be safe. Sometimes, when we are not providing those opportunities for autonomy for the child also does not discover his or her own voice and how he can use it to advocate for himself or herself. So I think it's important from a very young age that we give them opportunities, make them part of decisions that is being made for them, give them choices. What is it that you would like to do, instead of making those decisions for them? From a very young age, when they realize that their voice is important, somebody is listening to it, they'll also start trusting their voice, they'll also start valuing their voice, and they would also use it later for their own good or maybe good of their community. So, respecting autonomy is very important in creating future self advocates. And in this day and age, we need a lot more self advocates who have the lived experience to come and tell us, hey, this is not right what you're doing. Now, if you look at all these four areas or four core principles that we talked about today, um, we we've come a long way, and I think technology has helped us a lot in in making these neuroaffirmative practices more accessible. Now we know for communication there are a lot of apps that are available, that helps with picture based communication or word based communication or typing through those apps. Similarly, we also have our other word processing applications that we regularly use, like MS Word or notepads, or applications like that that can be used to type and communicate. I know a lot of children who enjoy communicating through WhatsApp, right? So they might not be able to talk and tell you things, but they will type in the family group and tell you this is what has happened today. So children are using technology in their to their benefit, um, and we are also finding that these are neuroinformative in nature. We also see that during COVID time we've realized that a lot of the online meeting applications and the use of social media has also benefited a lot of our neurodivergent friends. We see especially mm, uh, this being beneficial for a lot of our non-speaking neurodivergent friends. Some who have a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, do not want to come out in the world and meet people, but they are thriving in these in these virtual environments where they're able to come meet with people, be themselves, express their thoughts and ideas, and hence be heard. Like their voice is being heard because of these applications and the technology that we have today. So I wanted to end this conversation with the role of technology as well. So to to conclude the conversation, what I want to point out is that the more we keep emphasizing the deficit based approach, it is going to be difficult for our children to become independent. The problem is also that we are expecting our children to be independent in areas where they're probably not ready to be independent yet. That is also one of the factors that is coming in the way of, independence and inclusion. So we need to be clear on what is it that we are expecting from um, inclusive education, or and admitting our child in a regular mainstream school. We need to be very clear on our goals from that. If you're not clear on that, then it becomes difficult, um, not only for the child, but also for the school and the teachers, everybody else, all the stakeholders involved, because there is no clarity on how to serve the child. So um, I think it's important that we know exactly what we want from these opportunities. And it is also important that we keep that neuroaffirmative lens to make sure that our children are being supported so that they can thrive, not just be a part of a school system or a classroom. We cannot have inclusion without acceptance. So first we need to accept our neurodivergent friends as they are, and only then can we be able to include them effectively. That's the end of my presentation, and I'm open to any questions, thoughts, disagreements, arguments. Yes, Miss Sandhya.
Hello, Dr. Vindhya. I'm Dr. Sandhya. Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. There were a lot of insights that I could gain from your webinar today. So I had a couple of questions to ask. You'll have to excuse my ignorance. So I come from a medical background and I have no idea regarding shadow teachers and until and unless now. And but just today, we have appointed a shadow from inside. So I was just wanting to know what qualifications should one look? So, if not for Insight, I know there are a lot of organizations out there that offer shadow teachers. So, I want to know what are the basic qualifications? What are the boxes that a shadow teacher should tick? For you to take up. Can we go question after question, or should I finish all my questions in one go?
Let's go question after question. I'll answer that one first. So to me, I don't know if it's necessarily the qualification, because depending on the needs of the child, it could be somebody who has basic school degree who can support a child. It is about how you understand this whole process. What is your role as a shadow teacher in that classroom with the child? That is where we are seeing a lot of difference. Now, what we see is that a lot of the as I told you earlier, the whole idea is that deficit-based approach. When you're placing a shadow teacher, the person who's going there, no matter what their qualification is, their they're thinking their goal is to make sure that the child conforms to all the expectations of the all the environmental expectations. But that is not the reason why a shadow teacher is going there. The shadow teacher, as I said, is a their job is to bridge that gap between the learning needs of the child and what is expected, and to evaluate, is this an expectation that is appropriate for the child? Can this child deliver this now? Does this child need to develop more readiness before this child can deliver this expectation? So these are all things that a shadow teacher um, should be ready to ask. Now, how do you get that readiness? So that readiness has to come from training. Now, at Insight, we have a training that we do as soon as the teachers come in, but that is not the end of it. And we've realized that that training does not do anything, that training does not accomplish anything with the teachers, because they are fresh off the boat. They've come with a lot of ideas that they have trained in that they are trained in a postgraduate program in psychology. Now we do a lot where we are trying to help them unlearn some of the things that they have learned there, because that is not working out in our in our classrooms with our children. Some of it is not neuroaffirmative as well. So we need to help them unlearn some of the things and learn new things. So that doesn't happen in that one go. We see that, they struggle because this is something that they have been carrying on for a very long time. And now they've come to a place where, the whole belief system is being negated. So it takes them a long time. So we do constant supervision. We have weekly supervision that we do with all these teachers, where they come, they present their case, and we talk to them, and we keep asking them questions to ensure that are you following a neuroaffirmative approach when you're working with? So when you're doing this strategy, are you being neuroaffirmative? So this question is constantly being asked to the shadow for them to start thinking differently. So to me, it is not the qualification. It is that openness to learn what needs to happen. And it is also the openness to change that mindset that you came with. Now, we need to understand who would be ready for that kind of a training and that kind of a mindset change. I think that is the more important question than actual qualification. I don't know if I answered your question, Dr. Sandhya.
Yes, quite there, yes. Dr. Vindya, also, you mentioned that, boards have a requisite to have special education departments in the school. Uh, but, when we talk of advocacy, especially when a shadow is advocating for your child in the school, uh, how are we reflecting on this on a larger scale? Like, my son used to go to a school, it's a wonderful school for a neurotypical child. But now I'm pulling him out of it because they do not have plans of setting up then in the future. And though being a wonderful school, I have to pull him out of it. So, what are the remedies that I can seek? Can I write to the boards, or does that work? How are we looking at it, at least in the near future?
Have you checked to see whichever the board is that the school is following, if if having a special educator on board is one of the requirements? Because I know most boards are
Oh, I
mandating
am
it now.
sorry. I am not aware of it. It's actually an IGCSE board school.
Mm, mm,
So
mm.
I'm not quite sure if it's mandatory for them. But they were very
Got it.
nonchalant about it. They were like, no, we don't intend to get it. I mean, our job is to provide them with a happy childhood, and if the child is happy, it's enough for us. But it's not enough for us because we want the
Right,
maximum
right.
potential to be brought out for the child.
Yeah. Um, IGCSE is a little tricky because it is not an Indian board. And I don't know how they are, how they are maneuvering through the Indian education system. Because I know in um, some states IGCSE boards, schools that follow IGCSE boards don't get an NOC from the state itself. Now it's probably not true in Karnataka. I'm not sure about Karnataka, but um, we'll have to look into the legalities because, as I said, it is since it's not an Indian board. I'm also wondering how can we ask for these rights that the child has, because every school should have a special educator, but that is a board rule, right? Now I'm not sure if the law actually mandates having a special educator, which it should. I'll have to check on that and get back to you. If the law does, we can always use that to talk to them. We could look
Right.
at the RPWD Act and we could look at the RTE Act to see
Hmm.
what does the law state.
I,
I'm
I,
not sure
I,
on
I
that.
always thought the foreign boards are more accepting and more inclusive than Indian boards are, but then
They
this
should
was
be, they should
completely.
be. But when they come to the Indian soil, I'm not sure how they are operating. And that is my confusion. So that is something we will have to explore and
The Indianness gets to them. Yes, I agree with that.
see.
Last question. I'm sorry, I'm keeping you
No, no, no,
from
please, please.
answering other people around. So, when you're talking about behavior modification therapy and you are stressing on the need for a neuroaffirmative, way of looking at it, and not trample upon the autonomy of the child. What is your take on a child with certain self-harm kind of behaviors? So recently, this has started with my son because nobody is able to get his cues. He's getting frustrated. There's a lot of head banging, biting, a lot of these things happening. So, you know, if I don't know what kind of therapies would work for him. I know we can start to build on his communication, like you said. He needs people who get the cues. But what else can we do apart from just that? Because we can't find people who get his cues at all points of time. So something else has to be done for them.
Dr. Sandhya, this I may have to take offline because I'll need to understand what is going on. Now, if you say that you're going to have you started availing services from inside, I'm sure I'll probably come in contact with the teacher who will be working with your child. But I'll need more information before I can answer that question, because children have these kinds of behaviors for various reasons, and we need to understand where those behaviors are coming from before we can even think about how to intervene. So I think I'll take that question offline.
Sure, sure, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thanks.
Bindya. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good evening, Dr. Bindya. This is
Good evening.
Sana here.
Hi.
Yeah. I had a question. I've been shadowing my child for about a year now. I've been observing him. I do have a therapist coming in who's helping me out.
Okay.
I am looking to get him more independent now. I see his skills coming up. So, do you think there's a checklist I can look at and a process I can follow? I just don't want to jump in, leaving him alone in the class.
Right,
So,
right, right. How
so
old is your child?
he's 11. He's going to start grade 5.
He's going to start grade 5, is
Grade
it?
5, correct. And he has a good amount of language.
Okay.
Not
See
age
the
appropriate, but he
See,
has
the thing
language.
is, I would shy away from a checklist,
Okay,
because sometimes a checklist is trying to compare your child to the norm,
okay.
right? And your child's development may be very different from the norm,
Yeah,
because
correct.
we see that a lot of our neurodivergent children have spiky profiles, as we say, they may be
Correct.
really good at something, they may be better than their peers at some things, but they may not be, anywhere close to their peers in some other skills.
Okay.
So just by looking at a checklist you may not be able to determine if he's ready to be in a classroom without a shadow. The other thing that we also notice is that the higher the classes, the there is an increase in the expectations that is put on the child. So as I told you earlier, the the concern is not necessarily with the child. The concern is
Mhm.
with the interaction between the child and the expectation that is placed by the environment on the
Yes.
child.
Okay.
So if the child is not able to meet those expectations, that is when he starts reacting
Okay.
differently,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, I
So
got it.
when the expectations are increasing, now what happens is some of our children, their coping skills are probably right where it used to be, like 2 years ago or 3 years
Okay.
ago, or
Yeah.
maybe very slowly it is increasing. So
Mhm.
but the grade level expectations keep increasing, at a
Correct.
faster rate, but they're
Okay.
going into all these grades with the coping skills that they have, and that
Okay.
becomes difficult for them. So role of a shadow, for the most part, is I think to a large extent is co-regulation, right?
Oh,
Because we know for a fact that our neurodivergent children find it difficult to regulate
yeah.
and manage their behaviors and their emotions all by themselves. They need support from outside. And that
Yeah.
is why you see meltdowns. That is why you see, impulsive behaviors
Yeah.
or outbursts. Those are the reasons why you see those. So when there is somebody to help them manage those, that need will continue to be there until they are ready to do it, right?
Okay.
So as they
Yeah.
go to higher grades, I'm afraid that the expectations might increase and it might become more difficult for them to manage those expectations. So hence, leaving them without any support, like cold turkey, might not be the best idea. Again, Sana,
Okay.
I'd be happy to talk to you offline
Yeah.
and understand what your child's needs are
Yeah.
and see what could be some other things that we can think about. Because another thing that I recommend to families is that if at 11 and 12 years of age, your child is still in a regular classroom and you still think that this child needs a shadow teacher to support them in the regular classroom, then I would say that is probably not the right setting for your child. We need to look for
Okay.
a more appropriate setting for your child.
All right.
Because up until 12 years of age, I push for inclusion. I want children to be in the mainstream environments, be around children their age, do activities that children their age are doing. But after 12, then I kind of, switch gears, and then I start focusing more on, say, academics. What can we
Oh,
do? Because now, he's heading to 13, 14. Once he hits 14, then he's eligible to register for a 10th exam. Is he ready for that? Can he read? Can he comprehend? Can he do math? We look at all those
yeah.
questions.
Okay, I
So,
got it.
so we can reevaluate to see if this is still the right setting for your child.
Okay, all right. I will talk to you offline. Thank you, Dr. Bidya. Okay.
Hi, Mama. We'll just take a question from the chat. Meghna, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, hi. Hello, Dr. Bindya. I'll keep it short. My 9-year-old is currently doing some online classes, which, after a lot of research, I found some educators who are willing to meet him where he's at. And he is currently in a place where he likes complex topics. He likes, what he himself calls deep discussions. However, I do notice the trend after a bunch of classes, from the educator's side, shifts to information retention. And when I brought this up with the educator, they were very understanding, but their perspective was that information retention is very essential so that they can build on it and, continue their trajectory of whatever their plan is for the child. For example, they were doing ancient civilizations, and it it began to feel like there was a lot of focus on information retention. And in my personal research, I wasn't able to conclusively um, sort of identify how important it is. And what I also noticed is that my child was struggling to engage with the class as the demand for information retention sort of was increasing.
Yeah.
And I have to say that it's very, the demand is like very on a very low level, but he does respond to, you know, um, he's very sensitive to demands, and
Yes.
we've generally, had a lot of support, low demand. Environment for him with a lot of scaffolding. So, if you could, I'd love to hear your opinion on information retention specifically, especially for a neurodiverse child who is interested in deep concepts. What can I do to support him better?
We know for a fact that in this day and age, there is no there's no relevance for information retention. We know
Mm-hmm.
information is there at our fingertips, right? And with AI, we know how
Mm,
much the technology has changed, and how much we don't have to retain
right,
information. Right?
right.
One of the things that we also forget, so when we talk about different kinds of learners, we always talk about, um, okay, this child is a visual learner, this child is an auditory learner, this child is a tactile learner,
Mm-hmm.
and let's try and teach them in that way. So
Mm-hmm.
I for a, f- I know for a fact that that itself is not working. Okay, um, but what we are also not doing is that even when we have our children learn a certain way, we come
Mm-hmm.
back to the same way of expressing your knowledge that is learned.
Right.
So, which is writing, right?
Yeah.
And writing information that you have memorized, that you
Right.
have rote learned, right? Because that
Yeah.
is a system. So, when a child has a different way of learning, the child learns differently, child chooses a different way to learn. The child also chooses a different way to express his learning.
Right.
Yeah. So that we are not respecting. Now, in your case, your child's way of learning itself is not being respected, let alone, what is being expressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot of research around um, gifted education for children
Mm-hmm.
who have special needs. Okay, so
Right.
we call them twice exceptional, where you have a child who has some kind of a neurodivergence and hence
Right.
has a lot of difficulties that come with it, but is also gifted on the other side. So when
Right.
I say gifted, they're showing strengths, they're showing spikes in strengths on one
Right.
end. And some of these strengths would be shown through the kind of things that they are talking about, the kind of things that they're engaging with, their reading, or the kind of information that they are trying to gather. So what is it that they're looking up online? Like exactly like what you said
Yeah.
about your child, Meghna, where your child needs to go deep into a topic, right? So
Right.
that is what we need to promote then, right?
Right.
So how do we do that? So the problem is, as an educator, as a teacher, I only know one way of
Mm.
presenting the learned material,
Right.
right? I don't know a different way of doing it. And that
Yeah.
is the reason why our children are struggling, because we are not
Right.
creative enough to think about a different way. So one of the I can give you some names. These
Mm-hmm.
are like people who do research in this area. You can look them up.
Okay.
And what they do is basically what they're saying is they're recommending project-based learning. Yeah. And
Mm.
when I say project-based learning, what you need to keep in mind is um, we are looking at a bigger picture. Okay. So what happens is what we see is a lot of our neurodivergent children. The reason why they are not able to succeed in an inclusive setting is because they can't see the bigger picture. Right? They walk into the
Mm-hmm.
classroom. One day they're asked to do English. One day they're asked to do maths, something in English, something in maths. One day they're asked to do
Mm-hmm.
fifth grade. One day they're asked to do dance, whatever. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different things they're asked to do in every given day, but they're not, for
Right.
them it's not coming together. What is the bigger picture? Like, we know the bigger picture is, okay, later we go to 10th, we pass 12th, and then we go to college. We get it, but they're not able to make
Right.
sense. So what we have started doing, like I've started trying this out with some of my shadow teachers also, is that
Mm-hmm.
especially when the children are bored. Like I have a lot of children who come, shadow teachers who come and tell me about behavioral concerns, and we realize that it is because the child is bored,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And we talk about introducing these projects. So when I say a bigger picture, so it'll be like a big project, like, so you're saying in ancient civilizations, I'm going to take this particular ancient civilization and I'm going to do this project on it. Now this project can be anything, like, it could be about, I'm going to look at all the architectural features or architectural magnificence of this era, and try and connect it
Mm.
to some of the buildings that are there today. It could be anything,
Mm.
but it is a choice that your child makes, by the way. It's not what we decide. Yeah.
Right.
So this again, respecting autonomy, having him choose what he want to learn. You engage him in that decision and he comes up with the plan. Now, this is a big project, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is a bigger picture project, and you will have small, small things that you need to do to get towards it. Now, you need small pieces of information, it is there online. Like, you don't have to necessarily remember it in your head to use it, right? It's
Right.
everything there available to you, whatever you need.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're going in depth, and you're also manipulating that information, processing that information, and doing something with it, right? So
Right.
it could be like, sometimes picking a problem in your community and trying to solve it. You
Mm-hmm.
could probably look at, how it was solved in the Harappan culture, the same problem. How
Mm.
can we try and solve it here? Things like that.
Right.
So this can be like, the sky is the limit. I mean, there are so many different amazing ideas that you can come up with him,
Yeah.
just to make sure that he's not sitting there and just, rote learning facts. Because
Right.
I think he has a lot more potential.
Yeah.
His interest, his um, hyper focus in the topic itself
Yeah.
is something that is of
Exactly.
strength. That is a strength, and you need to pick on that, and you need to develop. So
Yeah.
short answer to your question is that rote learning is not necessary. But how do
Right.
you use that? There are so many different ways you can do it.
Um, Thank you for that. And one follow-up question to this. Um, so it did feel like finding a unicorn, finding this, mentor or educator to sort of meet the child where they're at. And like I said, the team, I think, is doing a good job at that, where they're incorporating, I would say, quite a few um, of the things that you just spoke about into the class itself. Um, I and it is not, the expectation is not for him to recall, like, say, all information from the entire 60 minute of class. I think the educator is expecting that he will remember, say, 5 to 7 salient points from the previous class,
But my
so
question
that
is,
they
what
can
is that information being used for? Why do we need
exactly.
that?
Yeah. So then my question is, I think I'm asking for some scripting support that I can then
Talk to
take
them, is
back to
it?
the team, because I've tried it a bunch of different ways, and it feels like I'm hitting a wall where they're like, yes, we will accommodate 100% of all of this, but the educator does expect that he. I think they're looking at it as proof of engagement, and I'm unable to sort of, yeah, so we are hitting a wall there, and I don't
Got it,
want to
got it.
let go of this environment because he really does enjoy it, and I see a lot of benefits from it, but this
Yes,
piece,
yes.
yeah.
So I'm putting a couple of names in the chat right now.
Okay.
So it's you can check out their work. Um, they do a lot of, as I said, they do a lot of work in the gifted education space. And Joe Ranzuli's work, especially, there is um, there is a lot of work that he has done on enrichment, right? Like how
Mm,
do you take a strength and enrich it? And there
yeah,
are a lot of ideas on how you can take a project forward, or so just read them up, and you're welcome to reach out to
sure.
me if you need more ideas. But I think maybe by reading these people, probably you will have enough to go talk to those mentors. And as you rightly pointed out, they're probably on the right track. It's just that there are
Right.
some of these conventions that they need to let go, because I
Mm,
need to understand, if what is he going to do with this information in the class? Because that information, and it's an online class, he can always have it written somewhere, right? why
right,
does he have to um, why does he have to memorize it? So that's what
right,
I don't understand. What is he doing with that information in class? So that
right,
will probably tell me why there is a need for rote learning, but I still don't
right.
see the need for rote learning.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and that's definitely a perspective that um, I didn't look at it from that perspective, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was
Good luck.
lovely listening to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vin.
Hi. Yeah, I think there are a few questions that are put in the chat. So I think Anita has asked, my child is a TBI patient and not writing and reading. What can I do?
Hi, Anita. Again, I think this might be something we might want to take offline, because when there is traumatic brain injury, it is very tricky, because we need to understand what are the skills that have been affected. And we can only tell that by working with the child to see where is the child struggling, right? Even when you say reading, where exactly is the child struggling in reading? Is it something that we can remediate, or do we find other ways of supporting him with reading? Similarly with writing, now I wouldn't probably emphasize a lot on writing. I would probably look at if there is a different way in which he can express his learning. But reading is something that I might pay more attention to. But I'd be happy to talk to you, Anita, to get more information and answer some of your questions. I don't think Anita's here now. Are there other questions in the chat?
Hi, Anita. Hope that answered your question. She has not responded onto the group. One
I
second
don't
now.
think she's
We'll
here
just
anymore.
see if she's responding. If not, we'll just take the next question. Yeah.
Meghna, which was the next question you
Yeah,
wanted
I
to?
think, yeah. Next one is by Sudha. Shilpa, will you take it?
Yeah, I can take it. So Sudha was asking, if a child displays aggressive behavior in school, what is the role of the shadow teacher? And she's considering taking a break from school and considering an inclusive school. So she's asking, is that a good strategy? And she's thinking of open school as a curriculum. So just these three questions.
Okay. So again, we need to understand where these behaviors are coming from. Sometimes we see that the child is really frustrated with some of the expectations that is placed on the child at the school. And some children, they get to a point where they've had enough and it's not working out anymore. Now, if your child has reached that point, then taking a break from school is definitely a good idea. We do sometimes recommend that also, because we see that a lot of children have sensory difficulties. Now, I don't know the details of what's happening in your child's case, but there are children who have sensory difficulties sometimes, which makes it really difficult for them to survive the day in the school. Now, there may be auditory difficulties or tactile difficulties or whatever difficulties. In addition to that, they have to meet the behavioral and academic expectations of the school. So it becomes a significant load on the child, and the child is unable to manage that load, and that is when there is a breakdown. And so I need to understand what exactly is happening there. But if you think that your child is definitely at the point where cannot take it anymore from school, maybe a break is a good idea. Now, I'm not sure which school your child is going to right now, and if it is not an inclusive school, because you're considering an inclusive school now. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Open schooling is definitely a good idea. But again, when it comes to open schooling, I usually suggest that if you are thinking about open schooling, excuse me, then we should just let the child be, learn things that the child wants to learn, just like, what, sorry, I mentioned in my response to Meghna. Let the child do things that the child enjoys doing. Let's work on the strengths. As long as the child is able to read and do some math operations, that is probably sufficient. And then when the child is 14 years of age, we consider NIOS as an option and then train the child towards NIOS exams. I'm so sorry. So it depends on how old your child is right now. Now, if your child is say 7, 8, 9 and all, I wouldn't say you have to consider NIOS right now, because that's something that I would consider later on when he's ready for the 10th exam. Now, there are options in NIOS called OBE. I forget what it stands for. But through OBE, you can write your grade 3 exams, your grade 8 exams, and maybe grade 5 also. I'm not sure. That is something some families choose to do, but I don't see any benefit to that. Because it doesn't really matter if you've written these exams when your child is ready to do the 10th exam. So, in my opinion, you can just wait until he turns 14 and then directly go into NIOS and do the NIOS exams. Until then, let the child do things that are, of interest to him, that are his strong points, and enjoy the learning process through that. That's what I would suggest.
Ma'am, just so that Sudha had mentioned that he's going to an inclusive school and he's doing very well in all the therapy centers that he's going to.
How old is your child, Sudha? I can see you're still here.
Yeah. Sudha, would you be able to participate in this program? He's 10. He's 10 years.
He's 10, is it? Okay. Okay, I'll probably need to understand this a little bit more, Sudha, to help you make decisions.
One second.
It's okay. Sudha, you're welcome to reach out to me.
Um, okay, she said okay to the okay to that. Yeah. So I'm so sorry that there are a few other questions. I'll just collate all the questions and send it to Vindhya ma'am. We'll just email the answers back, or if we have your contact already, you're with Insight, we'll reach out to you directly. We'll just wind up right now, ma'am, because if we do take more questions, I think I'll be holding you for a very long time. Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the session. I'm sure it was very insightful, and everybody who came here had a great interaction with you as well. Right. I hope you also had a good experience. Right. So if any of you are looking for any kind of shadow teacher requirements, or if you want any, if you have any questions that you would like answered, please do reach out to us at Insight. And thanks a lot for attending an hour and a half session on a Monday evening. So yes, thank you everybody. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shilpa. Thanks, everybody.
I just Meghna, you can just end the meeting. That'll be
Yeah.
helpful. I'll just take questions.